I should have known the trip was going to be complicated the second I said yes. It was one of those things you agree to out of habit. Old friend, summer cabin, just a week, nothing crazy. But the second I stepped onto the porch of that lake house, with my duffel bag slung over one shoulder and the heat already clinging to my skin, I saw him standing there, and I knew I was in trouble. Jake. He wasn't the one who invited me. That was Ryan, my best friend since high school, the kind of guy who knew too much about me to ever drift too far. Jake was Ryan's older brother. Tall, athletic, always had a bit of an edge to him. He was the guy who teased us mercilessly growing up. The one who always had a girlfriend. Always seemed a little too confident, a little too smug. We hadn't seen each other in a couple of years. The last time had been awkward. I was out by then, and he'd barely said more than 2 words to me the whole weekend. I figured he was one of those straight guys who got weird when sexuality entered the room, so I wrote him off as an asshole and moved on. But this time, when I stepped onto the deck and saw him lean against the railing in just board shorts and a backwards hat, drink in hand, he didn't smirk or tease. He looked right at me, long and hard, and then he said, "You look different." Ryan clapped me on the back before I could figure out what that meant. "About time you showed up," Ryan said, grabbing my bag and dragging me inside. "We're already 2 beers ahead of you." I tried to laugh, to shake off the weird tension, but I could still feel Jake's gaze on me as I stepped through the door. The cabin hadn't changed much. Wooden beams, sun-bleached furniture, the faint scent of sunscreen and lake water baked into everything. There were 3 bedrooms, a big open living area, and the kind of silence you only get when you're far from cell towers. The first 2 days were uneventful. We swam, grilled, played cards. Jake mostly kept to himself, reading on the porch or disappearing into the woods with a camera. Apparently he was into photography now, which felt weirdly domestic for a guy who used to crush beer cans on his forehead in high school. On the 3rd night, it was just the 3 of us. Ryan had passed out early after too many whiskey shots and a failed attempt at making s'mores without marshmallows. I was sitting by the fire pit, staring into the flames, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders because the night had turned unexpectedly cold. Jake came out quietly, barefoot, hoodie unzipped over his bare chest. He sat across from me, cracked open a beer, and stared at the fire for a while without saying anything. I figured we'd do the usual, ignore each other until morning, but then he spoke. "You and Ryan ever?" I blinked. "What?" "You know, hook up, or whatever," I scoffed. "He's straight." Jake nodded slowly, as if that answered everything. "But he used to sleep in your bed sometimes. When you lived together." My skin prickled. "That was years ago, and nothing ever happened." He took a swig from his beer, eyes still on the fire. "Did you want it too?" I turned sharply. "What is this, 20 questions?" He shrugged. "Just curious." "No," I lied. Jake nodded again, like he didn't believe me but didn't care enough to argue. The fire cracked, and a breeze picked up, stirring the leaves above us. He leaned back, legs stretched out, his beer dangling from one hand. "You know," he said after a while, "I used to think I had you figured out." "Yeah?" "Yeah. Quiet guy. Always watching, never saying much. I thought you were into me back then." My throat went dry. I didn't answer. "Was I wrong?" he asked, finally looking at me. There was no teasing in his tone, no smugness, just a question. I held his gaze, the fire casting flickering shadows between us. And for a second, I thought about lying again, about saying, "Don't flatter yourself." But I didn't. "No," I said quietly. "You weren't wrong." Jake exhaled slowly, almost like he'd been holding his breath. Then he stood, walked around the fire, and dropped down next to me on the bench. Too close. Our shoulders touched. "You still into me?" he asked. I turned to him, heart pounding. "Why are you asking?" He didn't answer, just looked at me, face unreadable, and then leaned in, slow, deliberate, and kissed me. I didn't move at first. Jake's lips were on mine, soft but confident, like he'd already made the decision and wasn't second-guessing it. My brain, on the other hand, was short-circuiting. All I could register was the pressure of his mouth, the warmth of his body next to mine, the way his hand came to rest gently on my thigh. Then I kissed him back. Not cautiously, not experimentally, just full on, as if I'd been holding back that one motion for years and suddenly didn't have to anymore. His breath hitched, and his fingers dug in slightly, anchoring himself like maybe he hadn't expected me to respond like that. When we finally broke apart, we both sat there in stunned silence, the fire popping quietly behind us. Jake stared at the ground, running a hand through his hair. "Shit," he muttered. "Yeah," I said, voice low. It wasn't awkward, not exactly, but it wasn't easy either. This was the guy who once made fun of me for watching Queer Eye, who used to bring home girls like it was a competitive sport. And now we were sitting here, our lips still damp from kissing, pretending the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. Jake exhaled and looked at me. "I don't know what I'm doing." I nodded. "I kind of figured." He gave a short laugh, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's not like I planned this. I just haven't been able to stop thinking about it." "About you?" I swallowed hard. "For how long?" "A while," he admitted, voice barely audible. "Since before you moved away." I turned to face him fully, my heartbeat still trying to make sense of things. "You've got a weird way of showing it." "I didn't know how to deal," he said. "You came out, and I panicked. I wasn't ready to ask myself any of those questions. So I avoided you, or teased you. It was easier than looking at what was going on in my head." The firelight danced across his features, his brow furrowed, his jaw tight. Like every word he was saying cost him something. "And now?" I asked. He looked up at me, eyes searching. "Now I'm still scared. But I'm tired of pretending. You're here, and it's just..." I didn't want to let the week go by without knowing what it would feel like. I blinked, absorbing that. "Was it what you expected?" I asked, a little braver than I felt. Jake gave a lopsided smile. "Better." Neither of us said anything for a while. He stayed close, our knees touching, and I could feel this invisible thread between us getting tighter by the second. "You want to come inside?" he asked suddenly. My breath caught. "Ryan is passed out cold," he said. "I checked before I came out here. He's not waking up till noon." I hesitated for just a beat too long, and Jake stood. He didn't reach for me, didn't try to convince me, just looked down and said, "I'm not gonna push, but I'd like you to." I stood up. We didn't speak as we walked back into the cabin. The hallway creaked beneath our feet, everything dim and quiet. Jake's room was the one at the end. He opened the door, stepped inside, and waited. I followed, unsure if I was making a mistake or walking into something I'd regret, but I went anyway. He shut the door behind us with a quiet click. Inside, the room was cool, the only light coming from a small lamp in the corner. Jake stood there for a moment, like he wasn't sure what to do next. Then he reached for me again, slower this time, more careful, and kissed me like he meant it, like nothing else outside that room mattered. We didn't rush. Everything about it was tentative, a little shaky. Jake touched me like he wasn't sure he had the right, and I kept waiting for him to stop, to laugh it off, to say it was a joke. But he didn't. He pressed his forehead to mine at one point and whispered, "This feels terrifying." "Yeah," I whispered back, but kinda right too. That night, we didn't do much more than kiss and hold each other. We lay on his bed, fully clothed, his arm wrapped around my waist as if afraid I might disappear. I fell asleep like that, his breath slow and even against the back of my neck. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't dream of what could be. I just let myself feel what was. I woke up before he did. The light filtering through the curtains was soft, golden, the kind of morning glow you only get in the woods, with no cars, no alarms, no interruptions. Jake was still asleep, his face relaxed in a way I'd never seen before, like all the weight he normally carried on his shoulders had finally slipped off. His arm was still around me. Part of me wanted to stay frozen in that moment forever. The other part, the anxious, logical, too much overthinking part, was already panicking. What now? Because it's one thing to kiss someone at night when the fire is crackling and the world feels quiet and far away. But mornings are a different beast. They bring clarity, reality, and in our case, they brought Ryan, who was probably going to wake up in an hour wondering why the hell his best friend wasn't in the guest room. I slid out of bed carefully, trying not to wake him. My shirt was wrinkled, my mouth dry, and I felt like every step I took was louder than it needed to be. I grabbed my hoodie from the chair and tiptoed out of the room, my heart pounding harder than it had during the kiss. I made it to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared out at the lake, trying to think. Trying not to think. That's when I heard the floor creak behind me. I turned, expecting Ryan, but it was Jake. He was rubbing the back of his neck, his hair sticking up in about 5 different directions, and his voice was still scratchy with sleep. Hey, I said, voice quieter than I intended. He walked over slowly and stood beside me, not touching me but close enough that I could feel the heat of his arm. You left, he said. Just wanted to give you space. Didn't want you to wake up and freak out. Jake gave a small nod. I wasn't gonna freak out. I looked at him. You sure? I don't know, he admitted, but I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. There was a pause. I could hear the clock ticking, the hum of the fridge, the faint wind outside. Then Jake turned to me, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it. I don't know what any of this means yet, he said, but last night it wasn't a mistake. My chest tightened. Okay, he repeated, as if testing the word. I nodded. Yeah, okay. Just then, we both froze. Footsteps on the stairs. Jake immediately took a step back, and I turned toward the fridge like I was looking for something. The moment cracked like thin ice. Ryan walked into the kitchen, yawning, hair a mess, hoodie half-zipped. Jesus, he muttered, rubbing his eyes. Why are you guys up so early? Jake recovered first. Couldn't sleep. Yeah, me neither, I added, trying not to sound like I was lying through my teeth. Ryan grabbed a mug from the cabinet and started pouring coffee, completely oblivious. So what's the plan today? Paddleboarding? I'm feeling ambitious. Jake and I exchanged a quick glance. Just like that, we were back in our roles. Jake, the older brother. Me, the best friend. Ryan, completely unaware. But something had changed, even if no one else knew it yet. Later that afternoon, while Ryan was out messing with the kayaks, I was sitting on the dock when Jake joined me again, 2 beers in hand. He handed me one without saying a word, and sat down beside me, our legs brushing. We sat in silence for a while, just watching the ripples in the water. Then Jake leaned in slightly and whispered, "You gonna come to my room again tonight?" I turned to him, heart racing all over again. "Yeah," I said. His fingers found mine on the dock, hidden from view, and held them gently. No fireworks, no grand gestures, just quiet connection. And it was enough. The next few days passed like we were walking a tightrope. By day, everything looked normal. Paddleboarding, board games, bad jokes over grilled food. Jake and I didn't touch, didn't linger too long in conversation, didn't make eye contact for more than a second when Ryan was around. But every night, after Ryan crashed, usually face down on the couch or with his headphones on in his room, I found myself quietly slipping into Jake's. It was never dramatic, no whispered plans or exchanged glances, just this silent understanding that when the house fell still, we'd find each other again. And in that quiet, in the space of a closed door and the hush of lake winds outside the window, something was happening. We talked more than anything. About college, about people we used to know, about stuff Jake said he hadn't told anyone. Things he thought about when he was alone, how he'd always been curious but scared, that he'd buried stuff so deep he forgot it was even there. He said things like, I don't think I'm gay, but I'm not exactly straight either, and I didn't know it could feel like this. Easy, I mean. Some nights we kissed until we fell asleep. Other nights we just lay there, his hand resting on my chest like he needed the contact to believe it was real. There was a sweetness to it, a slowness. Like we both knew how fragile it was. But that tension, that unspoken risk, it hovered over everything. Because no matter how careful we were, we couldn't control everything. It happened on the 5th night. Ryan had gone out for a nighttime swim, claiming he needed to clear his head. Jake and I were alone in the cabin, playing cards at the kitchen table, pretending we weren't counting the minutes until the porch door creaked again. Jake was leaning in close, laughing at one of my terrible poker faces when it happened. The door opened, and Ryan walked in. His eyes landed on us, still sitting close, the kind of closeness that didn't need touching to be obvious. Jake pulled back instantly, his expression shuddering, but it was too late. Ryan had seen enough. There was a beat of silence. "Hey," he said slowly, his voice unreadable. "Am I interrupting something?" Jake cleared his throat. Reaching for a beer like that would make it casual. "Nah, just hanging out." Ryan's gaze flicked between us. Right. The air was different now, tense. I could feel the hairs on my neck standing. "I'm gonna crash," Ryan said, already turning down the hallway. "Try not to stay up all night giggling." The door to his room shut with a soft thud. Jake swore under his breath and rubbed his hands over his face. "Shit!" I just stared at the cards on the table, my stomach in knots. "You think he knows?" "He's not dumb," Jake said. "He knows something." We didn't talk much more that night. I didn't go to Jake's room. I lay in the guest bed instead, staring at the ceiling, playing out a dozen different worst-case scenarios in my head. Ryan wasn't just a friend. He was the friend. The guy who stood next to me when I came out, who told off anyone who made a joke at my expense, who let me crash on his couch for a month when I had a falling out with my dad. And Jake was his brother? It wasn't just about us anymore. It hadn't been for a while. The next morning, the three of us sat at the breakfast table in stiff silence. Ryan munched on a granola bar like nothing was wrong, but I could feel the weight behind every casual sentence. Jake wouldn't even look up from his plate. We were on borrowed time now, and something had to give. It wasn't even an hour after breakfast when Ryan finally said something. Jake had disappeared down to the dock, pretending he had to check on the kayaks, but we all knew he just needed space. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone and pretending to be invested in the weather app, when Ryan walked in and shut the sliding door behind him. He didn't speak right away, just stood there, arms crossed, like he was still trying to decide what version of this conversation he wanted to have. Then, flatly, "So how long has it been going on?" My throat went dry. "What?" "Don't bullshit me." I sighed and put the phone down. "A few days," he scoffed. "Seriously?" "Yeah, I didn't plan it, Ryan." He leaned against the wall and stared out at the lake. "Was it just some weird hookup thing? You bored or something?" "No," I said, sharper than I meant to. "It wasn't like that." Ryan turned to me then, arms still crossed, but his expression softer. "Look, I'm not mad because you're you. I've known that since forever. You know that. But Jake?" I nodded slowly. "I didn't see it coming either." Ryan let out a long breath and rubbed his face. "He's my brother, man." "I know. He doesn't even date guys. Maybe he does now." Ryan gave me a long look. Not angry, not even disappointed, just unsettled. "Does he even know what he's doing?" I paused. "He's figuring it out." That sat between us for a while. Then Ryan muttered, "Damn," and dropped onto the couch beside me. He rubbed his eyes with both hands, then said, "He's gonna get hurt. Or you will." "I know." Another beat passed. "You like him?" he asked. I looked at him. Really looked. Ryan, who'd been with me through so much, who had every right to be wary, even protective. This wasn't him being a jerk. This was him trying to make sense of something new and messy and close to home. "Yeah," I said. "I do." He nodded slowly. Okay. I mean, I don't love it, he said, forcing a crooked grin. But if you're gonna date a dude, I guess I'd rather it be someone I know, even if it is Jake, the king of emotional constipation. I let out a laugh I hadn't realized I was holding in. You're handling this way better than I thought you would, he shrugged. I'll still probably punch him later, but we'll see. A few hours later, Jake came back up from the dock, sunburned and cautious. When he saw Ryan and me sitting side by side on the couch, his steps slowed. Ryan stood up, walked straight over, and punched him. Not hard, more of a sharp jab to the shoulder that made Jake flinch and curse. That's for not telling me, Ryan said. Jake rubbed his arm. Noted. Then Ryan grinned. But also, if you break his heart, I will ruin your life. Jake looked at me, then back at his brother. Fair enough. That night, we didn't sneak around. Jake and I still waited until the house went quiet, but this time, when I walked into his room, there was no need to whisper. We kissed with the door closed, not out of shame, but out of habit. It felt different now, a little more real, a little more terrifying. Later, as we lay in bed, Jake traced circles on my arm and whispered, "You know I'm still scared, right?" "Me too," I whispered back, "but I want to keep figuring it out. With you." I turned to him. "Yeah?" He nodded. "Yeah." The remaining days at the cabin slipped into a new rhythm, one that felt like a balance between the old version of us and the quiet, evolving new one. We didn't hide anymore, at least not in the same way. Jake didn't flinch when our shoulders brushed at the sink. He didn't look away when I caught him staring across the dinner table. And Ryan, to his credit, didn't make it weird. If anything, he almost overcorrected, offering Jake and me space, leaving to go for a walk whenever we so much as exchanged a smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. On the second to last night, we made a bonfire by the edge of the lake. The kind you only do when you're trying to bottle up a memory before it's over. The air was warm but breezy, and the sky was so clear the stars looked fake. Jake sat beside me in the sand, one leg stretched, one bent, elbow resting lazily on his knee. He passed me a beer and asked, "What happens when we leave?" The words dropped between us like a pebble in still water. I took a slow sip, then asked back, "You mean like us?" He nodded, watching the flames dance. "I don't know," I admitted. "You go back to your apartment. I go back to mine. The world starts spinning again." Jake glanced over. "And we stop?" "I don't want to." That made him smile just barely. "I don't either," he said. "But I don't know how to do this out there, like in real life, where people see." "You don't have to have it all figured out." Jake ran a hand through his hair. "I know. I don't want to lose this, whatever this is." I reached over and took his hand under the blanket draped across our laps. It was a simple touch, but the way he held on made my chest ache a little. "You won't," I said, and for the first time, I believed it. We went to bed late that night, too tired to talk, but too comfortable not to fall asleep together. No sneaking, no fear. Just us, curled up under worn sheets, with the breeze slipping in through the open window and the smell of the fire still clinging to our skin. The next morning was the kind of slow goodbye you try not to name out loud. We packed bags in silence, sipping bad coffee and avoiding the word later. Ryan hugged me first. "You're still coming to my birthday thing, right?" he asked, like we hadn't just spent a week unraveling and restitching everything we knew. "Yeah, wouldn't miss it," he smirked. "Cool. Don't bring Jake unless he's figured out how to lose at poker." Jake flipped him off casually, then turned to me. There was no kiss, no dramatic line in the sand, just a quiet moment where we stood beside my car, close but not touching. "You'll text me?" I asked. Jake nodded. "Yeah, but also, I might just show up." I raised an eyebrow. "Like at my door?" "Why not?" I wanted to tell him everything I was feeling, that I hadn't expected this, that I didn't know where it was going, that it scared me in the best way. But instead, I smiled and said, "Guess I'll leave the door unlocked." He leaned in, just enough to rest his forehead against mine for a second. Then I got in the car and drove off. I checked my phone the second I got home. No messages. Then, just as I was about to turn off my ringer and get in the shower, it buzzed. Jake. So, are you free next weekend? Jake didn't show up the next weekend. He showed up the next day. I was still in my laundry day clothes, sweats, no socks, a hoodie that hadn't been washed since before the trip, when I heard the knock. I assumed it was food delivery. Instead, it was Jake, standing at my door with a duffel bag over his shoulder and a half-apologetic, half-smug grin that I instantly wanted to kiss off his face. I said next weekend, I said, even as I stepped aside to let him in. I know, I lied, he replied, dropping the bag. I couldn't wait. That was how it started. No grand declarations, no moving in, just Jake staying for a few days, then a few more. Mornings spent tripping over each other in the kitchen. Evenings where he'd read on the couch with his leg brushing mine, like it meant nothing and everything all at once. We didn't tell anyone. Not at first. I wasn't trying to keep it a secret, but Jake was still figuring things out, and I wanted him to do that on his own terms, not under the spotlight of every mutual friend and family member who thought they knew who he was. What surprised me most was how quickly it stopped feeling strange. It was easy with him. Comfortable. He wasn't perfect. He left cabinet doors open, hogged the blanket, had the emotional range of a potato some days, but he showed up, every time. When I had a rough day at work, when my laptop crashed mid-project, when my old car died on a cold morning, and he drove across town just to jump it, he was there. And eventually, he stopped flinching when our fingers touched in public. He didn't pull away when I leaned on him at the movies. He introduced me to his coworkers as someone I'm seeing. I remember the first time he called me his boyfriend. It was a random Thursday. We were meeting Ryan and a few others at a bar downtown. We were already 2 drinks in when one of Jake's coworkers showed up unexpectedly and asked how we knew each other. Jake didn't hesitate. He's my boyfriend. Just like that. I didn't react at first. I was too stunned. Then I caught his eye and saw it. The quiet nerves, the flicker of, "Is that okay?" hiding behind the casual delivery. I smiled. "Yeah, I am." The guy nodded, made some joke about us being a cute couple, and moved on. But my heart didn't. It stayed stuck in that moment for hours afterward. Because for Jake, those 2 words weren't just labels. They were a statement, a step, a choice. And he chose me. A few months later, we went back to the cabin. Just the 2 of us this time. It was colder now, the trees bare, the lake still. We built a fire, sat on the same bench, drank the same beers, only this time, when he reached for my hand, we didn't have to hide it. Jake looked at me and said, "You know, I think I was always a little in love with you. I just didn't know how to name it." I squeezed his hand. "I knew. I was just waiting for you to catch up." He laughed, leaned over, and kissed me like the space between that first night and now had never existed. It had started as something uncertain, something messy, but it turned into something solid, something real, something worth waiting for.